My name is Scott Hunter, and I am the program manager on Dynamic Data at Microsoft. And before we even start today, I'd kind of like to, who in the room has actually played with Dynamic Data already? An idea? So I have a bunch of content for people that have not played with Dynamic Data, and I've got content that shows a lot of the new stuff we're going to do. I'm going to try to do about half and half, if that's okay with everybody, just to get everybody that hasn't played with it up to speed on what it is, and then we'll do some really cool demos. I've got some cloud demos, a whole bunch of neat demos. So kind of what I want to do for the session is I'd like to kind of explain the ASP NET Data strategy, what we're kind of doing as we move forward with data. And once again, explain what Dynamic Data is to those that haven't seen it, and show off the new stuff we have coming in the future. So the main thing is, if you've never played with Dynamic Data, what are we trying to accomplish with Dynamic Data? First off, one of the feedback we get all the time from people is it's too hard to start writing applications. And so one of the ideas behind Dynamic Data is to make it very easy to get started and build something quickly, almost in just a few minutes. And then you can basically iterate on it. Something else is a lot of our built-in controls today have hard-coded markup of what they do. If you put a grid view on a page or whatever, it decides by itself how it wants to display each of the columns in your data. And if you want to go change that, you can change it by templateizing the column, but that only works, you have to do that on a page-by-page basis, which means you're going to do it over and over again. So one of the concepts behind Dynamic Data is to take our existing data controls and make them more templated. Where there's templates that are part of your project, you can modify these templates, and it'll modify the default look and feel of these controls in one place. So for example, you drag a fancy date picker in, and then everywhere you show dates in a grid view, a details view, a form view, or a list view, you're going to get that control versus having to go manually put that on each of your pages. The other thing is, one of the ideas behind Dynamic Data is we're going against the ORM models that are out there. So Entity Framework, Link to SQL. Because we have these rich objects, it allows us to easily go get information about those objects. For example, Dynamic Data knows if a field is required or not required in the database, and can react accordingly. It can automatically make it required if it's not not nullable in the database. Once again, we can also look at the types. If something's an integer, I shouldn't let you type foobar into that. And so you get a bunch of built-in validation. Plus, you can add more validation by actually adding attributes to your model. The other thing is Dynamic Data takes advantage of the URL routing mechanism that we built into ASP.NET, and I'll show a few samples of that. And then once again, it's all about getting started faster, so the templates that we provide with Dynamic Data have some nice CSS, some fancy-looking pagers and stuff you can reuse in your own applications. So what I'll do to start is I'll just actually, let me just build a Dynamic Data application. So let me switch to Visual Studio. Do a new website. After you install .NET 3.5 SP1, in your, you'll have two new entries. Basically a Dynamic Data Entities website and a Dynamic Data website. And you can start either one of these based on if you're using Entity Framework or Link to SQL. In my case, we're going to use Entity Framework. I'll create this new project. And the first thing I need to do is I need a database. So I've got a couple of helper files in here. Let me move the database in here. Let's take a copy of Northwind. And speaking of everybody in here, who's used Link to SQL or Entity Framework before? Wow, pretty good chunk. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually add an Entity Framework model to my project. What this does for the people that have not used this before is it goes and builds rich CLR objects around each of the tables in my database and has relationships between them and stuff. So when I'm programming data, instead of doing everything raw, I can actually just get a product object and actually set the values on the product object. So I'm going to add this to my project. will generate from the model. And it's going to ask me what from my database do I want to actually have it model. And I'm just going to select and say I want to do the tables. And we're going to see a nice, rich graphical display of my database in a second here. Bingo. So the next thing I've got to do in a dynamic data application is I've got to tell dynamic data about the model. So what we'll do is we'll go grab this. I'll bump the source code up in a second so it's bigger. So in a dynamic data application, in my global ASAX file, I'm going to have a commented out register line here. Can everybody see the source code in the back, or should I bump the font up? That's good? Okay. So what I'll do is I'll actually just tell dynamic data what my model is. I can never remember how it renames these things. And we have this parameter called scaffold all tables. And since I want to get started with a brand new applications, I'm going to actually tell it to scaffold the tables for me. So let me run this. And this is all you have to do to get started. Basically, add your model, register your model, run the application. And I'm going to have a full application that shows all my tables. I can drill into a table. And when I drill into a table, I've automatically got, it's gone out and looked and found out what foreign keys there are and provided filters based on these foreign keys. We look at Boolean columns and put filters up for those. And you'll notice that we've done things like taken things like the supplier ID and the category IDs and automatically mapped them to the actual names in the foreign key tables. And you see this all the way through. If I go and actually do an edit of a row, you'll see those turned into drop-down boxes. And before, as I was saying, we are doing model level validation. So in this case, the product name column in this database is not nullable. So if I blank that out, it's automatically required. We can also do things like we're doing automatic integer validation as well. So if I try to do that, it's basically going to look and say, hey, I know that field requires an integer. So kind of trying to do better defaults so you don't have to write the required field validator, the compare validator for every single field all the time. The other thing you can see when I'm playing around with this is if I'm actually looking at that table, we know the relationship as well. So if I click on categories, beverages, it'll actually take me to the subtable. Oops, not what I want to do. Here's a list of my categories. I can view the products by each of the categories. So this is kind of showing you what you get for free. So, thank you. So, if I was you, the next thing I'd be going, great, that's great, but if I want to modify it, what do I have to do? How hard is it to modify this stuff? Because I don't want my application to look like this. The idea behind this is the starting point for you. This slide kind of explains the registration that we just did, where we said scaffold all tables equals true. But you'll notice in the blue bubble here, I've got some stuff that's showing some metadata. Let's see if I can find my mouse. And you can see that I've got a scaffold table attribute. I can place this on any of the partial classes inside of the data model to turn them on or off. Notice I also have a scaffold column attribute that I can place on the actual columns as well to turn a column on or off. So I'm going to show that real quick. So let me find product. If I can type, it would be nice. That's my problem. Off the screen. So what I can do now is I can actually come up on the product table, and I could do something like scaffold table false. Now if I run the application, I've basically turned off products showing in the scaffold. Notice it just disappeared. Same way, I can do the same thing on an actual column by column basis as well. So you're going to see that I drug in some partial class that actually had a few attributes already in it, and one is to turn off showing the primary keys in this case. So if I just actually go back in that application, let me save this and restart. I don't know if you saw it before, but the primary key was showing up in the product table before, and now it will be gone. Not appear anymore. So that's kind of showing how you can use attributes to change some behavior. There's a lot more attributes that we have. I'm just going to show a few of them today, but we have an entire namespace of attributes that you can use to change behaviors, change display, do validation. The next thing I want to talk about a little bit is we do routing for everything that we do in dynamic data by default. And this is kind of cool. This is showing a couple samples of how the routing works. Basically, you can give it a placeholder. I've got table, list view, and then I tell it the actual actions, my data model, list. I've got one down here where you can actually see that it says my category detail, and it's showing category ID as part of the route, showing the table name it's going against and the action. So these are kind of abstract. It's much better for me to demo them. So let me go and play with the routing a little bit. So we'll go in our global ASAX. And you probably noticed that by default, the views we were doing were, we show the list on one page, and then if I do details or anything, I jump to another page. We actually have another set of routes built into the global ASAX that you can just turn on yourself to change that. So what I'll do is I'm going to stick this up here. And uncomment them. And you'll see basically what it's saying here is for the list action, go to the list details template. For the details action, go to the list details template. So what I'm basically doing in here is I'm saying I want everything, whether I'm listing or doing a details, to go to the same template. So I'm going to hard code just one of our tables to do this. Products. And I'll actually give this a table name. So I've changed the route just for the product table here. So now when I run the application, and I drill into products, you're going to notice that we just changed the mode. So products is now showing with a combined view. So the idea behind this is you can have different sets of templates in our directories, and just by changing the routes, turn on or off different templates. So if I go back and look at a different table, these are back in the same mode of being on separate pages. So that's kind of showing you some of the power of what you can do with routes. So the next thing I want to talk about is customization. So we showed a little bit about how you can use attributes to turn some things on or off, how the scaffolding works, how you can use routes to change the pages that are shown, and you can even change the URLs as well. The next thing is, how do we customize this stuff? We have a whole bunch of levels of customization. We have one level which is page templates. And the page templates are what you were just seeing before. You saw the broken out views. One was a list page, and then one was a list details page. Those are part of your project. You can actually edit those things and change them however you want. So if you have a default look and feel for your site, you can go change those global templates, and that will affect everything that we scaffold in the database. Then we have field templates. Field templates are how we show each individual column in the database. And that's what I was talking about before when I said we actually enable you to change our existing controls. These field templates, which I'll show in a second, they actually are used to show these columns. They're part of your project as well. So you've got one built into your project for dates, for integers, for text. By changing those, you change the way a list view, a form view, a details view, and a grid view display those types. Then we have hints you can put on the model. So I have attributes called UI hint. By putting a UI hint on the model, I basically tell Dynamic Data, I don't want to use the default field template. I'd rather use a custom one instead. We're going to build a custom one in this demo today to show you that. And then we have custom pages. Maybe modifying these global page templates doesn't solve your problem. You just want to actually customize the entire page. You can actually do that as well. So, nowhere have we ripped ASP.NET out from under you. You can always fall back to core ASP.NET. And then we have, if you're doing templated controls, we actually have two new things called dynamic field and dynamic control that you can actually place in your markup, and you can actually put hints directly on those as well. So, as I mentioned a second ago, field templates allow you to customize the column. They're based on types. You can add as many as you want, and we provide all the source code for the default ones. They're very easy to create. We're actually going to create one here. The other controls that we add to ASP.NET is we have a dynamic data manager. This is how you turn on this functionality. If you want to turn dynamic data on for a website, you basically put a dynamic data manager on the page and register any of the grid view, form view, details view, or list views against that. And when they're registered, they start picking up these behaviors. If inside your grid view or details view, there's a new control, which is a dynamic data field, that's the equivalent of a bound field, but it's doing dynamic data type stuff. If you want to display a column inside of a list view or a form view, you would use a dynamic control and specify its control. And then we support both the link data source and the entity data source with this. And we've got a dynamic validator, which shows some of our validation, which I'll do in a second. And we have a dynamic filter, which is those filters you saw at the top of the page. So let's jump in and show off a few of these things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the Ajax Control Toolkit to my application because I want to use some stuff from that in my demo. So let me just add this real quick. I'm going to copy this over here. I also can never remember the actual namespace to type when I add this, so I'm just going to copy this from a text file and add this to my web config. Okay. So now that that's in there, what we'll do is we'll show off a page template first. So you'll notice in my dynamic data, I've got this new folder called dynamic data. And it's got a page template, a field template, a page template directory, and a custom pages directory. In my page templates, these are the ASPX files that build those default templates you saw when I ran the application. I've got one for details, I've got one for editing, one for inserting, one for listing, and one for that combined view. Let's say, in this case, I want to make a custom one for the product table. I can go in this custom pages directory, add a new folder based on the name of the table, and I'll just paste the list details in here. Paste a copy of it. And then I'll come in here and I'll say Scott was here. Just to show that I've modified this. This will only affect the product table. It won't affect any of the other tables in the system. It's complaining because I actually ran the page template itself. I didn't actually run from the root of my website. So I'll run from the root of the website. If I go into products, you can see Scott was here. Now, that's not very exciting, but I have, as part of my demo, I've actually got a really cool page template that uses the AJAX control toolkit. And I'm just going to copy it in and replace that one with something much sexier. So let's put this in. Our plan is to actually be able to have these up on the ASP.NET site as part of the control gallery, where you could actually go find field templates and page templates to add to your application. Just by adding this one in, if I run this, now you're going to see a dramatic change in the product table. If I keep running the subdirectory. It's killing me. What I will do is skip that demo. I can fix that demo in a second, but I'll skip over that for now. Yeah, it needs a default sort order, so I can probably just put that on. Where do you stick that? Actually, let me just roll that backwards anyways. I'm going to actually roll this all the way back because I want to demo something else. So I'm going to go with my global ASAX. I'm going to turn that route off as well. Okay, so let's talk about field templates. Field templates are how we display different types of data. So I've got this field template directory, and inside of it you'll see I've got things named like Boolean. That's how we display a Boolean. Boolean edit is a checkbox, so you can actually edit a Boolean. We've got things like date time, foreign key, integer, multi-line, text. These are all part of the project by default. If I go look at one of these, they're just regular ASPX controls. They have a few slight changes. You can see it's getting its value from something that's part of the base class. And in the case of the edit ones, you'll see that there's actually a method that's called extract values that's called to get the value back out of the field template. If I go and modify this field template, this one's pretty hardcore because it's the text one. Well, actually, I don't want to modify the edit one. If I go modify this field template, you're going to see the change all throughout the application. So now you see the letter A appeared in front of all the text on the stuff, showing it's modifying everything. That in itself is not very cool, but let's actually make our own field template here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the solution. In the field template directory, I'm just going to say add new. And we have a helper in here, dynamic data field, which will put one of these in for you. I'm going to call mine integer slider. Add this. And what that's going to do by default is that's going to put in both the read-only version and the edit version. In this case, I don't really want to change the read-only version. I only want to change the edit version. And I want to use the Ajax control toolkit here. So let's do Ajax toolkit. Let's do a slider extender. And let's set its target control equal to the text box. And for fun, we'll also add a label control here as well. This is where it'll actually show you the value. Since it's going to turn the control from a text box to a slider, I need somewhere to actually show what the value is going to be. And I can tell this to bind to that. Okay. So now I've got this new field template in here. How do I use it? So to use it, I need to actually add some metadata to my model. We'll go find the product table again. And I want to put this on the units in stock field. So what I'll do is I'll add a placeholder here. Units in stock. And we'll put a UI hint on this. And we'll say we want to do integer slider. So what this tells dynamic data is when it goes, normally it would go use the integer template for this. Now it's going to see if it can find one called integer slider first before it goes and falls back to that. So yep. Thank you. I don't need Visual Studio. I got you guys. Okay. So we'll go into products. And we'll edit one. And wow, now I've got this cool slider. So without having to go and modify the actual page, just by putting these hints on my model, I can change the behavior without having to go and touch the actual page. But that's only partially cool. Notice when I was dragging that back and forth, it was between 0 and 100. One of the things we support in dynamic data is we have some validation attributes as well. So I'm going to put a validation attribute of range on here and say these things can be between 0 and 150. And I need to make the slider support that as well. So what I'll do now is in the page behind on the slider control, I can actually say the namespace that all of our attributes comes from is system component model data annotations. And I want to find that range attribute. I want to see if that range attribute actually exists. I can say metadata attributes of type range. Oops. Range attribute. Now let's tell it I want the first or default. So what that'll do is that's going to go and look at dynamic data. It keeps a list of all those attributes that are placed on the model and puts them in a nice collection for you. So in this case, I'm going to go look and see if I find a range attribute. And if I find one, then I can actually take the slider. What have I killed it this time? Ah, there's actually a bug here too. No, it's good. Yes. So let's go look at make sure I put an ID on the slider. I did not. So what we can do now is we can say slider 1. It's got a minimum. I'll set the maximum for it. Okay. So now, because we placed the metadata on the model saying the value needs to be between 0 and 150, if I go back and edit a product, do an edit, and now you're going to see that my slider goes between 0 and 150. So this is just showing you some of the power you can do with attributes and field templates with dynamic data. So, all the demos I've shown so far have been using a scaffold. I'm sure most of you already have applications today, and you say, hey, I might want to use dynamic data in my application today. Can I do that? And the answer is yes, you can. All that scaffolding stuff I showed is just a piece of dynamic data. I would consider it one of the smaller pieces. It's just part of how we recommend you start building an application quickly and then go customize on a page-by-page basis. But if you have an existing application, I think there's a lot of use for this technology for you because it's going to do this, a lot of that validation I was showing you is going to be in there for free. And you can use the field templates to customize how our controls display stuff. So I've actually got a demo here. Which one is it? Called existing website. And what this is this is an actual running application that I have that I actually took using ASP 2.0 or 3.5, and then I wrote the same page with dynamic data just to show you the difference between the two. So if I run it, it's not super exciting or anything. I'll run it here. It's cool when I show the source code. So I'll run this, and we'll do the ASP 2.0 style page. And basically what it is a grid, actually a list view showing a list of addresses, and there's the details on the right. You know, if I select these things, they change over here. And if I do a edit, I can edit and all that kind of stuff. And what I did is I made sure that this is the ASP2 version. I made sure it actually had the same kind of validation that dynamic data would do by default. So notice these fields are required in the database, and so they're required here. And I've got a foreign key up here as well. So let's look and see what the code looks like if you wrote this today. If you're writing this today, you're going to get a page that looks something like this. I'm going to show you the meat of this. Here's my details view. And because I wanted to add validation to my details view, I have to basically template size every column. So you'll note there's a template field on pretty much every single column. And this thing goes on and on and on and on. It's got required field validators, It's also doing something else that I didn't show earlier, which was we know when we look at the database how big a string is. So we can actually go and automatically set the text box to only let the right amount of data be input. So you'll see in this version, I've got maximum length set on each of these things. So this is a lot of code. And the negative of all this code, too, is let's say you go change a column in your database from nullable to not nullable. You've got to go make sure you go touch all your pages and fix your validation rules, or there'll be a mismatch. Also, if you look at this page, to go do that foreign key, I actually had to add a drop-down list, an entity data source. I had to wire these things all together to make that show up as the drop-down list. Now let's go see, first off, let's go see. Total lines in this page, we have 211 lines. So let's go look at the dynamic data version of this thing. So I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to show the details view. Bam. That's it. I basically have a dynamic field for every column in my database, and all those validation rules that were there are just picked up by default because they're already on your data model. Why do you have to duplicate them again? So we went from 200 lines of code to 84 lines of code. Please tell me this could help you guys out. And when we do that, we're not baking magic in or something either. I mean, you saw, these are just field templates. These are things you can go and edit and change the behaviors yourself. It's not like there's some automatic behavior being cooked in here that you just can't change. So I think it's going to be really compelling. Something else that was on that page, if I'm looking at the old version, I made the address book, the email address clickable. So if you clicked on the email address, it would open up the browser and do that. And by doing that, I actually had to go and write some eval stuff and some junk like that. What I did for the dynamic data version is I went to the model that we do things now, which is I basically went and modified the text template to be a hyperlink. And if you look at the source code for it, I went and said, give me the data type attribute for this column. And if it's a URL, I have code that turns it into a hyperlink. If it's an email address, I turn it into a mail to. And then if you look at my actual data model, you'll see that I actually went and created partial classes, and I added some attributes to these saying, hey, this is an email address, this is a URL, this is a date, this is a date. And that's the dynamic data way of doing this. Instead of going and hand modifying your page, just go add some attributes to your data model and make your field templates understand those attributes. And so just to show that, if if I clicked one of these guys, it's going to try to bring Outlook up. So that's kind of showing how you would use this in your existing page. And I'll point out one more thing while I'm here. Let's go to the dynamic data page. You'll note that to make this work, all I did was add this dynamic data manager to the page. And then in my code behind, you're going to see I registered my 2 controls against this. That's how you turn dynamic data on for existing controls. We're going to have a declarative version of this in the next version of dynamic data that will be part of Dev 10. Okay. So now, to me, is going to be the fun part where I can actually start showing and talking about some of the new stuff we're going to do. I know cloud is a lot of the stuff that's been shown here at PDC this week. So I want to show you how you can use dynamic data with cloud. So, and this is a really cool sample. So who all here has seen cloud stuff this week? Do you guys think it's cool or not cool, or what's cool? One of the cool things about the cloud stuff is some of the cloud stuff, if you've seen the SDS stuff, it actually allows you to develop in a new way where you can actually write code first. And I'm going to show how I can basically just load a file up, create some classes, run it, and have a fully running data application. So we don't have this on our CodePlex site. but we're going to try to get this code up on the Codeplex site in the next week or two. So if you guys want to try ASP.NET running on the cloud, you can try this stuff. So what I'm going to do here, let's close some of these things down a little bit, is I'm just going to create some objects. So how about we create an address object? Public class address, and it's going to derive from this cloud DB entity base class. And let's just put a few fields in here. Let's say we have a street. Maybe we have a city. And maybe we have a state. And a postal code. Now, I've got to write a little bit more code for dynamic data to understand what this is, so I'm going to create one more class. Let me just steal something from up here, actually. I'm going to create a context. This is the same kind of, equivalent of a context if you were creating an Entity Framework or Link to SQL. You'd have a data context or an object context. In this case, I'm going to have a cloud DB data service context. So we'll just call this addresses. We'll call this address context. And all I do is basically create iQuerables of my objects. We'll call this addresses. So you see, I basically just wrote two classes. One is the actual object, and then one is a context that returns an iQuerable of that type. Now, all I've got to do is take this context, register it with dynamic data, like that, and I can run this application. And it will fail because I'm not plugged into the net. I do not have my own cloud. So let me just make sure we have connectivity. Cool. So if we actually have connectivity, this app should run now. So you see my table there. And if obviously there's no data in the database yet, I can say I want to insert a new item. I'm just going to put some junk in. So that's pretty cool. I don't know if you noticed that. I didn't create any tables. All I did is wrote an object. Registered the object with dynamic data. I get an application that runs. And it doesn't stop there. I can do more with this. I mean, let's go and add another class. So maybe we have an address type. This is a cloud DB entity. And maybe this just has a string that we would call name. And we'll need to add that as an iQuerable down here. Let's copy this. I'm going to relate these things in a second. So we'll have address types. If I run this now, just adding a new class, I'll get 2 tables. So let's go to address types and let's add a few types. So maybe we have a work address. And we have a home address. Okay. So now I want to add that address type as a drop-down list on my address as well. So what I'll just do is I'll just create a address type ID. Some of this is working by convention today. Basically, it's saying that if I take the type of another one of the objects and put ID on the end of it, that's the relationship there. Let's run this one more time. Go to addresses. Do an edit. Bingo. Now I can set the address type. So it just shows you, just writing a couple classes, running an application, bam. This cloud stuff is going to be cool. That's going to be how easy it is to develop using ASP.NET in the cloud. So that's my cloud demo. So we don't have any of that stuff on CodePlex today, as I said, but that's something we will have up on CodePlex in the next few weeks is some of our cloud support. Next thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of just data in general, is I want to talk about data sources and some of the work we're doing there. If you were in the ASP 4.0 roadmap talk earlier this week, I showed a little bit of that. I'm going to drill into that a little bit more. So if you use our data sources today, they're great for just doing simple things like I just want to go list some data and stuff. But what if you want to do complex things like be able to do searches or do ranges against your data? That stuff's harder to do. So what I'm going to show you is we want to add a new mechanism to data sources that we have today, which allows you to actually have strong filters, or I shouldn't say that. It's better. It's link-based filters. And we're going to support a few by default. We're going to have one for doing string searches, and we're going to have one for doing ranges. But you can actually create your own. They're just classes that have a base class, and given an iQueryable, return an iQueryable. So in this case, I'm going to take one of the apps here. Let's just add a new page to this. We'll create a new web form. And I'm just going to create this the way I would create it today. And then I'm going to turn it into using the new data source that we support. So the stuff I'm showing now is all in CodePlex now. If you want to play with it, it's up there. You can do the same kind of demo that I'm doing here. So let's just grab a grid view, stick it on our page. Let's grab a linked data source, stick it on our page. I'm using linked data source in this demo, but we will have support for this in Entity Framework data source as well. So we just don't in the bits that I'm playing with. So let's go to the designer real quick because it makes it easier to do this, and we'll wire a few things together. Let's take our data source, and we'll say, yeah, that's fine. Let's go grab the product table, and we don't really care about anything else there. We'll take our grid view, wire these two things together, and I'll put paging on just so we don't get like a billion rows, and I've got a page put together. So now all I'm going to do is take this linked data source and kind of replace it with a new one. So in the bits we have on CodePlex, we basically have replacements for some of the built-in controls. And all you do is you just put the word futures instead of ASP colon in front of them, and that gives you the new version of these. They're functionally equivalent to the ones that we shipped in 3.5. So we'll build it and see if it seems to work. Okay, so let's, if I ran this page right now, won't be anything exciting. Basically, I get a bunch of data, and it's got paging in it. So the question would be is, if today I said, I want you to filter this that searches the product name for text from a text box, how would you do that? The answer is you would write a lot of code. Too hard to do today. So one of the common complaints we got with dynamic data was we don't offer enough filtering. And that's what kind of drove this work we're doing. So now what I would do is, let's just go add a few things to the page here. I'm going to create a text box here. Let's say search. Put a text box on the page. And we'll put a button here as well. And we'll just have its text say search. And maybe we'll put a BR here. Okay. So now, on my linked data source, I'm going to take advantage of this new feature we've added. We call it query block right now. And I'm going to add a where expression to this. And my where expressions, if I look, I've got a few of these. I've got range and search. And I'm going to do a search one. I'm going to say the product field I want to go against, the data field I want to go against is the product name column. And then I can select what kind of search type I want. Do I want to do a starts with, ends with, do a contains? I'll do a contains. And now all I've got to do is tell this which control to get the value from. So that easy. Now I'll just type in something like hang, bang. One column, one row comes back. That easy to add searching. And it doesn't stop there. I mean, as I said, we've actually got a few more of these things. So let's go add a few more text boxes up here. Let's do range. Add one more text box. And now down here in my search area here, we'll add a range expression. And I'll tell it which field I want to go against. We'll go against units in stock. And we'll tell it what kind of range type. Do I want to do a min, a max, or do I want to let you specify both? I'm going to let you specify both. And now all we have to do is do the same kind of thing before. Specify the control parameters. So text box 2. And text box 3. Run this one more time. And now let's say units in stock from 30 to 40. Bam. It just shows the ones, looks like 5 or 6 rows that map. So you're seeing what we're trying to do with our data source controls, make them much more flexible. How can you do this kinds of searches today without having to handwrite iQuerybles, handwrite where blocks, all that kind of stuff. So what do you guys think of this feature? This is something that we're still discussing internally. Do you guys like it? Cool. The next one I want to talk about, and I'm not going to hand type the demo, is all the dynamic data stuff I've shown so far today is based on linked to SQL Entity Framework. And who in the room does not use either of those technologies? Wow. So you guys are all using linked to SQL Entity Framework for all your work? Okay. So one of the feedbacks we got on Dynamic Data 1.0 when we shipped it, it was part of .NET 3.5 SP1 that we shipped in the summer, was that, hey, I've got my own data abstraction layer today, and I don't want to buy into linked to SQL Entity Frameworks, or I've got a legacy project that we're not going to convert because it's too much work to convert. How do you support that with dynamic data? And that led us down a path of wanting to support some kind of business layer where you could write your own business layer and we can consume that from dynamic data. I'll just do a quick demo of what we're thinking along those lines. So let me just change this around a little bit. So what we're kind of thinking around those lines is all the stuff you saw dynamic data do today, it does because it can go look at your data model and see how everything hooks together. As soon as you just start having methods on a class, how do we figure that kind of stuff out? So in this case, you'll see I have a Northwind entities data provider. It's got a base class that does some of the work for this. And basically all I do is have methods like get all products. I can have methods that take parameters, get all products with min price. And you'll notice that we mark them with attributes for select. And then if I want to have the ability to insert, delete, or update, those are marked as well. And so this actually would be a new data source control we're going to have, which would be a business logic data source control, which can consume these things. And dynamic data will be able to consume this as well. But it means you can just write your own methods that return an iQueryable. We'll call them and do all the work. That's really how this differs from the object data source. Object data source today allows you to do some of this, but it doesn't bring iQuerybles back. And we want iQuerybles back because it allows us to turn on all those cool filtering features I was showing earlier. So just to show this, that this is actually working, let me just put a few breakpoints in here. Run this. And so you can already see that it's hit my breakpoint, so it's actually running code, and you'll see that it's passed in a parameter. I'll show you the markup for this in a second. So this is where I can type in that parameter. I typed in 30. 30 will come in here. But because this returns an iQueryable, then all that searching that I was showing before can work against this as well. So if I go and type, I forget if we have a begins with or an ends with. I'll just do the range one. That's easier. Unit price, we'll say between 10 and 20. So it first calls my business method, just taking the one parameter, the units in stock, returns that iQueryable, and then the query block that we have runs on top of that and filters again. And you can see that it brought the right stuff back. So let's go look at the source code for this guy. You'll see that I have a business logic data source. And what I specify is I specify which method I want to call on the object. and I specify the parameter and where to get the parameter from, the control ID, so the units in stock comes from that. And then that magic query block that I was showing that we're adding to link data source and the entity framework data source is here as well. And that shows you this is something you could not have done with object data source. Because it doesn't return the iQueryable, you would have had to implement all that search ability yourself. So this is the direction we're going down for dynamic data. We hopefully will have refresh bits of this stuff with dynamic data support sometime late this year, early next year. So do you guys think this is useful? Or cool. So what else can I show? So maybe do another demo real quick inside of here. And that is, you saw that rich query block that we added. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the reason behind that query block was because we had people complain in the first version of dynamic data that our filters weren't good enough. So if I run this, from the filter sample. If I run this today, I'm going to go and show the products page, and it's going to look just like it does today. It's going to show the same filters you've seen in all the demos I've done so far, except now I'm going to show how we've made filters something that you can do templates for as well. So if I go into products, I've got these same old filters that we've always had. One of the common things is, hey, I don't want to select just one category. What if I want to select multiple categories? How would I do that? And so to support this, what we're going to do is, just like we have field templates, we're adding filter templates. So you'll notice in my dynamic data directory now, I've got this directory called filters. And I can specify multiple filter types. And how would I turn this on? To turn this on, I would use a new attribute we have called filter. And it has a couple things that I can specify. I can now specify to override the default one, and in this case I'm going to use the multi-foreign key. Multi-foreign key. Something else that we had complaints for that we're addressing in Dynamic Data 2.0 is, I've got these filters on the page. What if I don't want them? So you'll notice that one of the parameters here is actually enabled. I can turn filters on or off, and my bits here don't have it, but we also have an order as well where you can actually specify the order you want them to be in. But in this case, I'm just going to say I want to change the filter to be a multi-foreign key. What that tells Dynamic Data to do is to go dig in that filter directory, see if it finds a filter called that, and replace the default filter with that. Once again, you can write your own, fill that directory up, and use them all over your applications. So now you'll see category turned into a bunch of checkboxes. And I can check as many or as few as I want. And go. So that's multi-foreign key. I'm going to go back to the slides real quick and see if I skipped anything. We have some new field templates we're going to add. We're going to have new field templates for doing URLs and email addresses and enumerations. Something I don't have a demo for today is entity templates. So I've shown you these filters, where these field templates where you can actually have a template for a particular column or column type. What if I say I want to have a template for my actual product? A product is these fields. I want to show a product anywhere on my website as these fields. I might have multiple versions of these. I might have an admin version of a product where a few fields that an anonymous user couldn't see show up, like sale price or sale dates or something like that. So we're going to actually make it where you can actually templatize the entire piece of data that you're showing on the page. We've gone over the query block. We've gone over rich filtering. I'll do a quick demo of MVC. So a question I have for everybody is, How many people in the room are using MVC? How many people plan to use MVC in the future? Cool. So how many people would like to see the dynamic data work that I've shown you today on web forms working on MVC? My boss wanted to know that question, so. So we are looking at doing dynamic data for MVC as well. This is a demo that I showed in the ASP 4.0 roadmap on Monday. This is on Codeplex today. You can go to our Codeplex site and download this. It's a full running blog. And where dynamic data for MVC is today is it doesn't actually have the scaffolding yet, but it has the field templates, it has the entity templates, and the validation stuff that I've shown for MVC. And it does data binding as well, where you can easily take data from an object, put it onto the form, and back off the form. So I'll just run this real quick. The way dynamic data looks in MVC is if you played with any of the MVC bits today, we have this notion of helpers. And dynamic data will show up as special helpers where you can basically say, I want to show the product name field. I want to show the product units in stock field. And then we'll go find the templates and do all the stuff like I've shown before. So here's a blog sample. And this is kind of cool because it does show some of the validation stuff. If I go to the admin parts of the site and go, say I want to add a new post, and I just go and press Add Post, you're going to see that you're going to get some of the rich validation that we have in the web form version of dynamic data directly in MVC. For fun, let's go look and see what this looks like in the source code. Close down a few of these things. So you'll notice that we have render dynamic field. So basically these are just HTML helpers that you'll put in your source code and say I want to render a field. We give it the object and obviously the field in the object. And by doing that, you're going to get all the same rich validation, rich field template support in MVC that we have in web forms. And while I didn't have a demo of the entity templates inside of the web form stuff, I do have it in MVC. So in this case, I have an entity template directory. And inside of that, I've got a post edit. This is how I edit a post. And you'll see that basically the markup in here is the markup that would be a post. And you can then see it's using HTML render dynamic field for each of the fields in the post. So I want to have time for a little bit of Q&A, so I'm going to leave the sample at this. This is on Codeplex. If you guys want to download it and play with it, please do. We'd love to hear your feedback on it. So any questions? Mics?
Hello?
Yes.
I have a couple of questions on how we are actually writing the code. Looks to me as though it's going back to the ASP way of writing it, spaghetti code writing all over the place. And am I the only person who's feeling that way? It's like I know we did the code separation. We went back out of having the ASP page separate from the code behind pages. Now I see more and more of examples that Microsoft actually prescribing that everything is jumping back into spaghetti code and it's making it a little bit more unreadable for
we're actually trying to focus back on actually getting it to a point where you actually do a lot of the work on the data model versus being on the code pages. That's the main thing that I'm trying to show in the demos here is we're trying to push to the model. So it's like, you know, right now you put a lot of your rules in your application on the pages, which, as you said, and we don't consider that to be a good thing. The rules on what ranges a field can take should be on the model, one place, so they can be shared. One thing I didn't point out a whole bunch in the demo was all our attributes come from a namespace called System Component Model Data Annotations.
Okay.
And that's because we expect other presentations layers at Microsoft, maybe Silverlight, WPF, to pick up on those same attributes. So you can go put these attributes on your model, and whether you're showing data from ASP.NET, you're showing it from WPF, you're showing it from Silverlight, you're going to get the exact same behaviors. So the idea is we're trying to push some of this logic back to the actual model versus the individual pages. Okay. Does that answer your question? I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to push away from the page to the model.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, over here.
Yeah, just a quick question. A lot of what you were doing there was kind of done on a global basis.
Was on what?
A global basis. You're kind of changing everything to global ASAX.
Yes.
Do you have a mechanism to change things contextually? Maybe you have same entity in multiple pages with different designs.
Yeah. So to do that, what we have is we have obviously if you put the attributes on your model, that's kind of a global place to put those attributes.
Okay.
Some of those attributes are also placeable. If you put a dynamic control on a page, dynamic control takes parameters for some of those things as well. So what you would do is put your global version on the actual object, and then if you want to override that behavior on a page-by-page basis, you can do it on the dynamic control level. And where that's really going to come in the future is when we do these entity templates. Mm-hmm. That's going to really solve your problem, because then it's like, okay, I've got product, which I use everywhere, and I've got specialized product. Right. And on the specialized product, I can go put some other metadata on it to change the behavior just for the specialized product, so you don't have that global problem. We also have something else. A question we commonly get is, all the attributes are being placed on the model, at compile time. What if you want to do it at runtime?
Sure. And
we actually have a sample up on Codeplex as well, how to actually inject the metadata at runtime. So if you want to maybe have something that spins through your database and goes and pulls rules off the database and puts it directly onto the system, you can as well. So I think we have a couple touch points to address that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, over here.
So you showed an example where you're calling a method on a business service
Yes.
class. Is that name bound at design time or at runtime?
That'd be a runtime.
So is there going to be any tool to validate that your names are correct?
Good point. I don't know yet. I mean, it's too early. That stuff is, of anything I showed today, that's the most prototypey stuff. We're not, I don't know when that stuff's going to ship.
Okay.
We actually do that for, another common question along the same lines is, you saw me putting attributes on the model too. And we have code at runtime that checks those. Not at compile time, but we have code at runtime that checks to make sure you actually put your attributes on something that's actually in the model. But we might want to do something, for the data source as well.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
Over here.
I was wondering if the scaffold supported uniqueness.
And what do you mean by that?
Like SQL unique property, if it's a link to SQL or something like that. How basically, if you tried to put in, if you had a unique property on the name of something and you tried to insert or add an entry with the same name, does it validate on that?
Right. The answer is no, it would not validate by default for that, because that is something that the link to SQL model itself doesn't do any enforcement on.
Really?
That's done by the database level. So the ORMs aren't doing that kind of validation on the actual model, but it's actually very easy to add that support to the actual partial classes. So there basically is if you look at those partial classes, there's a is valid, not is valid, there's a validate partial method. And what you can do is write some code inside of that to do the check, which you would want to do anyways outside of dynamic data, because if you're going to use those same ORM classes in a console application, you would only get to uniqueness if you actually, you would violate uniqueness unless you had the check at the actual ORM level.
And you can do different kinds of checks other than just uniqueness.
Sure.
In
that partial method, you can do whatever you want to do. You could do your own business checks and actually check the values of the object and throw exceptions. That is something that dynamic data does support. I didn't show it. We have an exception called validation exception. If you throw a validation exception from that partial method, we'll catch it and show it as a string on the page. versus letting that database error bubble up. So what you would do is override the partial, throw the validation exceptions, we'll catch them and display them.
Sweet. Thanks.
Yep.
When is the feature stuff scheduled to come out, to be shipped?
Most of the stuff in Futures that's up there is going to ship in Visual Studio 2010.
Okay.
But we are going to continue to push updates of the Futures for quite some time. So if you're on 3.5, we've actually if-deffed all the code at Redmond, so we can compile most of the new features on 3.5 and compile them on 4.0. And so you're going to see us probably continue to push versions of the Futures through March or April of next year up on CodePlex on 3.5. And then at some point what will happen is soon as there's nice stable versions of 2010 out in beta and stuff, we might quit updating the 3.5 versions. But we won't stop updating the 3.5 versions until there's nice stable versions of 4 out there.
And they'll be part of 4.0, I would assume, right?
Yes, sure will. Over here.
Yeah, hi. Do you have any overlap or collaboration with SharePoint? Because they do form generation too with a similar templating structure you've had. Because I'm wondering, we do SharePoint customization. Would there be any overlap in future evolution of those technologies, or just in general, how have you collaborated with them, if at all?
Yeah, we actually have talked to them. In fact, I've got if you come see me after this, I can maybe send you a sample. We actually have a sample of some SharePoint work that was done to make the ability to add and modify tables in a database very simple to do from SharePoint.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if we could leverage techniques SharePoint
Yes.
to non-SharePoint.
Yeah, you can leverage this inside of SharePoint. Somebody's actually written that internal to Microsoft. I don't know if we can publish it, but I've seen it.
Yeah, is the model localizable into other languages?
Yeah, I didn't show that. All the attributes that I was showing before, they all take a resource manager. You can specify a type of a resource manager to them, at which point when we do like error messages and stuff like that, we'll actually look those up in the resource manager. We can also do that for the actual column names as well. We actually have an attribute called display name, which allows you to change. When I was running it today, it's basically going and pulling the name of the right off the model, but we have an attribute that lets you rename it, and with the rename of that attribute and the resource manager, you basically can globalize or localize the actual columns in the database as well.
And that uses the same model that the rest of sort of the ASP techniques use today?
Yeah, it uses it's basically the Unity framework model. So basically there's attributes you place on the model, this display name, and it'll let you do that. You have to use dynamic data. You would have to use dynamic data for your controls, though, because dynamic data is the only thing reading those attributes.
Yes.
But as I said, that doesn't require you to change your app, really. You just have to register the control with the data manager and put the attributes on your model, and you'll get that support. Yes, over here.
Do you plan to support different models behind data providers for the same model?
So supporting different models is part of the reason that you saw the business layer that I was showing earlier was we actually have support for other models today. Dynamic Data has a provider system that is how it goes and figures out what's on a model. It's called a Dynamic Data Model Provider. Obviously, we have ones for Link to SQL and Unity Framework that are built in. The Astoria stuff I was showing, or the ADO.NET Data Services stuff that was doing the cloud stuff, that's using ADO.NET Data Services. We have a model provider for that as well. That's in our futures bits. We have some third-party people like Franz Bauma's got his own provider for LLBLGen. And you can write your own. So obviously there's ones that we'd like to get out there. We'd like to have one for NHibernate is one that we would like to try to get. So
thank you. One more question. Interaction rules based on user interaction on the same page. Do you plan to support something when users select something different data is showing on? Can we build this dynamically?
I don't understand the question. What do you?
I don't know how to explain. No. When complex business rules implement with dynamic forms, we have to hide some views of data or select some different source of data.
Using agents on the client, or
Yeah.
yet another direction with dynamic data?
We'll look into that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Hi. With these new features in place, when should you avoid using dynamic data?
Do what?
When should you avoid it?
Would you have?
When should we avoid it?
Avoid using dynamic data.
When should you avoid it?
Yeah.
Obviously, I would say that you should turn it on all the time. But today, the real time to when you're going to avoid it are honestly if you're not using Entity Framework or Link to SQL today.
Okay.
You'd have a hard time using it against something other than those two models right now. So if you're not using those two models, that's when you avoid it. But I can't think of any reason why you don't. There obviously is a small perf hit in dynamic data. It's about 10%, so it's about 10% slower than the native controls today. So that would be the only case I can think of today is if you have a perf problem.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes, over there.
Hi, I've got a question. Is there any support for authorization, specifically on tables?
Authorization?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we didn't ship any authorization support in 1.0. There will be a sample that will go up on CodePlex today or maybe tomorrow that shows doing authorization. It's basically using the role manager, and you can basically put attributes on each of the tables saying which roles can do which actions. And we're looking to see if we can ship that in the Visual Studio 2010 .NET 4.0 release. But I'll have something up on CodePlex this week around that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
You had mentioned that you would like to see a provider for NHibernate. Is that something that you think your team or Microsoft would be eventually coming out with, or you would just like to see that coming out of the NHibernate people?
I would actually prefer the Hibernate people to work on it because as they change Hibernate, they could change the provider versus us working on something that would have to be synchronized with them. It's probably better with them owning it than us, just from the standpoint of also you wouldn't want to tie it to the actual framework releases as well because then it would be cooked for like 2 or 3 years.
Right.
So I think it'd be much cooler to have it be something that I don't think we wouldn't mind helping write the first one and then letting somebody else maintain it.
Okay, thanks.
You had something else you wanted to ask, Dimitri? Yeah, it is tonight, isn't it? Yeah, so at 5:30 there's an Ask the Experts session where a whole bunch of people from the ASP.NET team will be to answer questions about dynamic data, MVC, AJAX, everything.
You're going to be there?
You-
You're going to be there?
What do
You're going to be there?
Yeah, I'll be there.
we do if we need to separate the tiers? So the ASP runs at the DMZ. We have a middle tier. So how do we marshal that?
So I would argue that if you want to do the multi-tier stuff, that's where the business logic data source would kind of come into play because then basically the dynamic data stuff is calling into the business tier, the business logic tier, which can then make calls to your other tiers. If you look at Link to SQL and Entity Framework today, they're 2-tier technologies from the standpoint that they're richly bolted together. You need to have one more tier between them, and that's what the business logic layer is for.
I guess I was kind of hoping you'd say that the exposing your data as services from the middle tier would kind of integrate with this.
Yeah, that would work too. I mean, we do support ADO.NET Data Services. So if you want to expose your data through, ADO.NET Data Services, we support that through our bits on CodePlex today. Any more? Cool. Well, as Dimitri said, come see us at the Ask the Experts tonight. 6 o'clock, not 5:30.